This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Hey, let's talk about the NFL Combine, right? Because it's that time of the year where you'll see 40 times plastered on. And I want to start this video, which is going to be critical of if the Combine really needs to stay around, with some praises of the NFL Combine. I think the NFL Combine is really good for fan engagement. The reason I think the Combine is really good for fan engagement is it is a great way to introduce fans to certain players. If somebody runs a 4.3 40, that's going to be all around your timeline. And since we've been doing the Combine for so long, you don't have to explain to anybody why a 4.3 40 is impressive. You don't have to tell somebody, like the barrier of entry to be excited about that, very small, which means that more people can join in on the fun and say, hey, you heard about this dude? Like, it's one of the most important things that the NFL has when it comes to especially like skill players and especially defensive players to build new stars. Like, when you want to build a new star in the NFL, yes, obviously they have to perform, they have to play well, but what initially gets that star on the radar for the general NFL fan is the Combine, right? Think about Myles Garrett. Now, everybody knew Myles Garrett was going #1 overall, but I don't know a ton of people that was watching week after week of Texas A&M football. And if honestly you listen to some of the takes about Myles Garrett at the time, it's obvious not a lot of people were watching Texas A&M football, right? Like, people were doing the same stuff they did with Myles, like this year when Myles won Defensive Player of the Year. We're like, oh, well, the production is down. Teams were literally doing everything they could to avoid Myles Garrett at Texas A&M, same way that they're doing for him in the NFL. So his production dropped a little bit, but Myles Garrett aside, Myles Garrett wasn't a superstar in college. He was very popular. Everybody knew who he was if you were deep into college football, but it's possible that by the time you get to the draft, those people who don't watch that much college football are like, who's Myles Garrett? Then you watch Myles Garrett measuring at 6'5", 270, and run a 4.7 340 and jump a 40-inch vertical or something close to that. And then you measure that 40-inch vertical to Odell Beckham, and you say he jumped higher than Odell Beckham at that size. And then you measure his 40-yard dash, and you say, hey, he ran faster than Jarvis Landry, a wide receiver. And that helps you put that athleticism, right? This amorphous thing that's really hard to describe of what makes Myles Garrett special, which is he's probably one of the greatest athletes in the last 10 years to enter the NFL draft at that position, all of a sudden gets distilled in a way that's very, very easy for anybody to understand why that dude might be a star. And that pays dividends years down the line when Myles Garrett starts producing, puts up those numbers. People are already familiar with him because he became a star through that Combine. The NFL Combine is good for a lot of things for the NFL. And that's why it's not going to die, right? It's a great event for networking in NFL circles. It's a great event for networking in NFL media circles. It's a great event for, just being able to get a grip on the players' personalities and getting everybody in the same place and all of these things. It's really good for the NFL's processes. But the skills part of it, right? The workout part of it, that's the part that the more the Combine goes on means less. There was a time where the 40 time meant everything, right? Like, we were at our peak of Combine workout swaying draft picks in like 2007, where a good Combine can get somebody pushed like 2 rounds. That's not the case anymore. I don't think we value the Combine as much. And there's a reason that we don't value the Combine as much. And that's because what we've realized over the last few years, well, not last few years, over the last 10 years, is what we realized when they invented the combine to start. It's a standardized test. The NFL combine was always created to serve the same purposes that a standardized test is. It essentially and literally is a standardized test for athletes going into the NFL. It's the same thing as an OGT if you live in Ohio. It's the same thing as an ACT, SAT. It's literally just the standardized test. That's what it was invented for, right? Because back in the day, they didn't really have a structure for this whole draft thing. It was kind of random. You just kind of watched some tape of some college guys and then you drafted them off of that. And the tape that you had back then was pretty rudimentary, right? You didn't have GPS tracking. You didn't have all of this stuff that tells you how fast somebody's moving and next gen stats and all. You didn't have any of that. You just had film and you just drafted these guys and it wasn't a great process. So they figured a standardized test would be a great way to measure these guys off the same baseline. I want to know if this guy runs faster than this guy. Let's have them both run the 40-yard dash and we'll see who runs faster. That is the initial purpose of the NFL Combine. But once people catch on that this is something that could change their draft stocks from day 3 to day 1, once people catch on to how important this test is, there becomes a bit of a cottage industry that is created around that test. I'm pretty sure when the ACT first came out, people weren't going to ACT tutors. But then once we found out how important those scores were to college admissions, all of a sudden that industry popped up around the ACT. Oh, I got ACT tutors, and we got SAT tutors, and we got PSATs, and we got pre-ACTs, and we got ACT workbooks. People start teaching and learning to take the test. Not, hey, I'm going to get good at math, so when I take that test, I'm going to do great at math. Now, I'm going to learn about the sciences, so when I take that science section, I'm going to be great at the science section. No. It wasn't about learning the subjects that you were being tested on. It became about learning the test. And once you get to that point, the standardized test stops measuring general areas of strength and weaknesses and starts measuring your ability to take a test. And that is significantly less useful in most applications than just a general test of what you're good at. And that's the issue with standardized tests. On paper, a standardized test is a great idea. Let's give them a measurement for everybody to work on, and then we'll see who's good, who's not, and we'll work with that information accordingly. On paper, it sounds great. At the beginning, when you first do it, it probably works out pretty well. But after a while, people catch on, and people realize how important these tests are, and then they just start shortcutting all the information. Start just learning that test. That's the issue that a lot of educators have with standardized testing, is that people spend too much time trying to learn how to do this test instead of trying to learn how to do the skills that the test is testing. It's a backward way of going about it. End up with a lot of people who can take some multiple choice questions but can't answer anything critically, right? We see this because I grew up in a generation of kids who all did standardized testing. I don't know when they started it, but I know all my life, going from first grade to when I graduated college, we was doing standardized tests. And I know a lot of people who struggled once they got to college when it comes to answering questions that did not have definite answers. When it came to critical thinking, like, you ever wonder what the cutoff is? Like, a lot of people could take that test, do well on that test, but when it comes to like critical thinking, when it comes to coming up with answers to questions that don't have obvious answers or a right answer necessarily, when it comes to making a thesis, all of those things, people who tested for the test or studied for the test, they don't really do as well, because some of this stuff is about thinking on your feet. Some of this stuff's about thinking in general. Some of this stuff is about breaking down something to a micro level. Some of this is about looking at the macro. It's a lot of different ways that you can approach it, but if you're just used to doing the test, you're not going to know enough base level information about the subject to be able to do any of that. So how does this relate back to the NFL Combine? Well, if you just teach somebody how to run a 40-yard dash and they play wide receiver, but you're not spending a ton of time on the route tree, they're going to get drafted, but they're not going to know how to play football. We've seen this. Corey Coleman, Anthony Schwartz. There's tons of guys who are great 40-yard guys or great athletes, but did not spend enough time, or maybe just could not get to the points where they were good football players. And that's what the Combine is doing. When people test for these tests, right? Because if you run a bad 40, then all of a sudden your stock goes down. And now, you have to spend a portion of your training on learning this 40 time or learning how to run a great 40-yard dash. Well, now you're taking away time that could have been spent on actually learning how to play football. The reason I love the Senior Bowl and I'm not the biggest fan of the NFL Combine is obvious to me. The Senior Bowl is a measurement of how good these guys are at football. The Combine is a measurement of how good these guys are at taking a test. A physical test, but a test. I am not as moved by the Combine as I am something like the Senior Bowl, because in the Senior Bowl, you get information like, oh, Tez don't like the press. Tez Walker, right? They got the press on him. He didn't like that. That's useful. But if Tez runs a great 40, who cares? Like, if you get a hand on him, that 40 time never happening. So look, I'm not saying the Combine is useless and that you're an idiot if you factor 40 times into your equation on what players you like. I factor 40 times still into equation. I care about the 3-cone drill. I care about the 40, not the 40, the vert, the broad jump, all of that. Like, I think these drills do have some level of importance, but when you make that the only thing that determines on where you put a player, you start making mistakes. Like, for example, schools don't just let somebody in just because they had a great ACT score. Like, that will be something that will help them get in. But, like, if you want to go to a good, like a great one of those, like, expensive private schools like Princeton or, like, I don't know, it ain't even got to be an Ivy League. It could be somewhere like Tulane, right? Very good school, very, very expensive school, and very high on admissions, right? Or Georgia Tech. You want to get into one of those schools, yeah, having a great test score, cool, but what else are you doing? What are your extracurriculars? What do you bring to the table? How was your interview, right? How did you do in more practical applications of your knowledge, right? Test is only testing how good you are at test. Same thing's true with the NFL Combine, same thing's true with scouts. Same thing's true with these players. You are testing how good they are at football. So the Senior Bowl matters. The Combine matters a little. Their pro day matters a little bit, right? How do they weigh in? Did they stay in shape? Did they run the 40? Did they do the like, how do they interact with their teammates? Do they have a lot of guys from their team there to show support? Are these guys who are generally well liked in their locker room dynamic? Or are these guys who don't have that great dynamic there? You also get to walk around the campus where they were at college, so you get to know people who knew them, and maybe not in the professional way that they want you to know them, right? So you get to know different information about them. Do they show up on time? Is this person a hard worker? Is this person ambitious? All of these things. It's all of these things that go into a pile. But the Combine is how a lot of us find out about these players. So it ends up being a disproportionate part of the measurement for a lot of us. This is my yearly warning to remind everybody, don't do that, right? The Combine's important. It's important for fan engagement. It's important for some things when it comes to these prospects, for sure. But it's not the only thing. And don't let the Combine overrule what you saw on tape. Don't let the Combine overrule what you saw when you seen this dude play football, right? But that's my thoughts. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.